Sadly, I also lost an investment in a company that I believed was developing a breakthrough concussion drug. You'll understand why it's too late for me because I've recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's.
All right, so today we are diving into a story that seems like it's got everyone talking, and that's Brett Favre and his Parkinson's diagnosis.
Yeah.
You sent over a bunch of articles on this, and it seems like you're interested in a lot more than just the headlines.
Right.
You want the real story, the implications for the NFL, for the sport itself. So let's unpack this.
Yeah, what's so interesting here is the setting of his announcement, a congressional hearing
Right.
on welfare funds.
Right.
Not really the place you announce a health diagnosis.
It's definitely not your typical I'm going on Oprah or,
Yeah.
Doing some big tell-all interview. It's a congressional hearing that he's required to be at.
It's exactly.
It's an interesting choice for sure, especially since those hearings touch on his own potential involvement
in this whole thing. But you also flagged his past comments about the sheer number of concussions he said he's sustained during his career.
Right.
He's talking thousands and claiming that even the ones that people think are just, minor,
Right.
still do damage. So we're already seeing this web of connections.
Yeah.
His football career, his diagnosis, and then maybe even legal ramifications down the line.
Yeah, and that's why I understand Parkinson's is so crucial here, because I think a lot of people, they hear Parkinson's and they just think shaky hands.
Right.
They don't really know.
So it's not just shaky hands.
Right.
What are some other ways that this disorder can impact daily life?
Yeah, so Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease,
Okay.
which basically means it affects the brain and it happens over time.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine like a gradual slowing down of your motor function.
You have uncontrollable movements, stiffness, difficulty with balance.
Yeah.
Basically, everything just gets harder and slower.
Wow.
And crucially, it gets worse over time.
Right.
And Favre was diagnosed at 54, which is relatively young for a Parkinson's diagnosis.
Wow. I remember watching him play wincing at those tackles back then, and we didn't think twice about it,
Right.
It's chilling to consider the damage that we didn't see.
Exactly.
Especially for a guy, they called him the Iron Man. He
Yeah.
played, 297 consecutive games or something?
Yeah, it's almost superhuman.
It's unbelievable.
And that's what makes this deep dive so important, because we need to understand not just what Parkinson's is, but what it potentially reveals
Right.
about a sport like football.
And the million-dollar question on everybody's mind, I'm sure, is there a direct link between his football career,
Right.
specifically concussions, and this diagnosis?
Right.
You highlighted some studies in the articles you sent over showing a connection between head trauma and increased risk.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is we can't definitively say that, X number of concussions equals
Right.
Parkinson's. It's not that simple.
Right.
There's genetic predispositions, environmental factors. It's really complex.
Okay, so there's no smoking gun. But what does the research tell us about the risks?
Well, one study found that even a single mild brain injury, like a concussion,
Okay.
can increase the risk of developing Parkinson's by up to 56%.
56%.
Yeah.
Wow. That number really hits home. It makes you think twice about every big hit you see. On the field, we tend to focus on the immediate, like, oh, he got back up, he's fine.
Right.
But that is terrifying.
It's the long game.
Yeah.
It's the stuff you don't see right away.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Wow.
Yeah. And it really does make you reconsider all those,
Right.
big hits you see.
Yeah.
And it brings us to a topic that's been looming large over all these discussions for a while, and that's CTE.
Right. CTE, it's been in the news a lot lately.
Yeah.
Often you see it with these stories about, former players.
Right.
These heartbreaking stories about memory loss,
Yeah.
mood swings, even dementia.
Yeah. It's a really tragic reality, because
Yeah.
CTE is a devastating neurodegenerative disease.
Right.
And it's very similar to Parkinson's in that it's linked to repeated head trauma.
Yeah.
But the tough thing is, we can't diagnose CTE in living people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it requires an autopsy.
Which is why that study on deceased NFL players was so alarming.
Exactly.
I mean, didn't they find it in something like 99% of the brains they looked at?
That's the one. No, it's important to remember
Yeah.
that study had its limitations.
Okay.
The brains were often donated from players who were already exhibiting symptoms.
Right.
So there's some selection bias there.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that every football player will develop CTE.
Okay.
However, it does.
It still paints a pretty grim picture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really does. And I think it just underscores
Yeah.
the very real consequences
Yeah.
of repeated blows to the head.
Right.
Even the ones that seem, minor at the time. And it really throws Favre's situation into, sharper relief.
Yeah.
If somebody like him is facing this,
Right.
what does that mean for other players?
Right. What about the guys that didn't have the spotlight and maybe didn't have access to the best healthcare?
They might not have even been diagnosed.
Right. It's really...
Right. And they might be suffering in silence.
It's a sobering thought for sure.
Yeah.
So given all this, what is the NFL doing?
Right.
I mean, they have to be taking this seriously at this point.
Yeah, they've implemented new safety rules.
Okay.
Like they're penalizing helmet-to-helmet hits more.
Okay.
There are concussion protocols in place now.
Okay.
They're pushing to improve helmet technology,
Okay.
trying to lessen the impact.
So it sounds like they're at least
trying.
making steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
Are they enough, though?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And the answer is it's complicated.
Okay.
Some experts argue that these changes aren't enough.
Yeah.
They say that the very nature of the game,
Right.
the collisions,
Right.
make it impossible to completely eliminate the risk.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of the NFL's past.
Exactly.
I mean, they haven't always been honest about these risks.
All right. There were accusations that they suppressed research,
Right.
that they downplayed the dangers.
Right. And even pressured players to come back.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Before they were fully recovered.
Before they were really ready.
Yeah. And that history has understandably led to a lot of skepticism,
Right.
even with these new efforts.
So where does that leave us? I mean, what does this all mean for the future of football?
Yeah.
Can we as fans even reconcile our love for this sport
Right.
with the very real risks that it poses to the players?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's a discussion that goes
Right.
far beyond just Brett Favre.
Of course.
This is about the players.
Yeah.
It's about their long-term health.
Yeah.
It's about the future of the game.
That's
It's
true.
about acknowledging the potential consequences
Yeah.
of every single big hit that we see.
Right.
And grappling with the ethical complexities
Yeah.
of this sport that's, so ingrained in our culture.
It's a lot to process. We've gone from one quarterback's diagnosis to a conversation about the soul of football. It's a lot. It is a lot to process. But amidst all this heaviness, I think it's important to remember there's still hope.
Absolutely.
A Parkinson's diagnosis isn't a complete dead end.
Right.
While there's no cure yet, there are treatments that can make a real difference.
Right.
Early diagnosis is key.
Yeah.
And then specialized care, including medications and therapies, can help manage the symptoms and improve quality of life for those living with Parkinson's.
Exactly.
So it's about helping people live their best lives, even with the disease.
Exactly. For example, there are medications like levodopa, which helps the brain produce more dopamine,
Okay.
a chemical that's crucial for movement and coordination.
Right.
And beyond medication, things like physical therapy, speech therapy, even dietary changes can all play a role in managing the symptoms. And the research continues. So there's always hope for even more effective treatments and maybe one day a cure.
That's good to hear. And thinking about Brett Favre specifically, I can't help but think about his resilience.
Right.
This is a guy who played through all kinds of injuries during his career.
Right.
Maybe this is just another challenge for him to confront another comeback story waiting to be written.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
He's certainly got the grit and determination, but his situation, his willingness to speak out, it's also a catalyst for a larger conversation.
Right.
How will this impact the future of football?
Right.
Will it force athletes, fans, and the league itself to look at the game through a different lens?
It's like we can't just cheer for the big hits anymore without acknowledging the potential cost.
Right.
Could this lead to more changes in the game? More protective gear? Stricter rules?
Right.
Or will it take a fundamental shift in how we think about the sport?
Those are questions we all need to grapple with. And perhaps even more importantly, how will this impact young athletes?
Right.
Will they be more cautious, more aware of the risks, or will the allure of the game, the dream of playing professionally, outweigh the potential dangers?
Tough questions with no easy answers, but they're questions we can't ignore any longer.
Exactly.
This deep dive into Brett Favre's story has taken us far beyond one quarterback's diagnosis.
Right.
It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about a sport we love.
And sometimes those uncomfortable truths are the ones that push us to think critically, to demand better, and to advocate for the well-being of the athletes who put their bodies on the line for our entertainment.
Well said. This has been a deep dive in every sense of the word, insightful, thought-provoking, and more than a little bit unsettling.
Right.
Thanks for taking us on this journey with you.
As always, it's been a pleasure exploring these complex issues with you.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep asking the tough questions and stay curious.